السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. And welcome to our series, The Greatest Miracle After the Quran, the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In our last episode, we had discussed how the stage was set for the Battle of Uhud when the Quraysh had come out with 3,000 men, and the Prophet ﷺ left Medina with 1,000. However, Abdullah ibn Ubay, the head of the Munafiqeen, left with 300 people while on the way, and left the Muslims with a fighting force of only 700 fighters. Now, as the stage was set, as the Prophet ﷺ had placed 50 archers on a very strategic location on a small hilltop called Jabal al-Ruma, which became known as that. And the Prophet ﷺ took the mountain of Uhud towards his back, and the Meccan army in front of him, while Medina behind them. So this was something that the Prophet ﷺ used in order to use the big mountain as a shield behind him, and the mountain of the archers as a strategic location to control the movement of Quraysh and to defend the Muslims from the backside. Now, this was basically the gateway, and the Prophet ﷺ had put those archers on the gateway so that the Quraysh cannot come around it and flank the Muslims from behind. Now, once the battle began, both armies drew near, and a man from Mecca called Talha ibn Abi Talha came forward on his camel and issued a challenge. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam radiallahu anh, the son-in-law of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, answered, and he was a very heroic and a very ferocious fighter, and he managed to jump on top of the camel of Talha and threw him down and finished him. The armies set upon each other, and Khalid ibn al-Walid, who was not a Muslim yet, he was the head of the cavalry from the Meccan side. And he attempted 3 times to encircle the army by going behind the mountain of the archers. However, each time he came near, the archers basically lit him up with arrows, and they were not able to cross that. The Quraysh came, and they had 11 standards on this day. So they were 11 people or 11 groups, and each of these groups had a leader who was holding on to a flag. Now, the warfare in those times used to basically be a game of morale and perception. So basically what would happen is that you had a standard that someone was holding, and he was very well at defending that. And the opposing forces would focus their attack on that flag. And if they could make that flag drop, that would basically start to become a victory for those who managed to drop the flag. So as you know, as I say, capture the flag, that if you capture the flag, you can start to then control the battlefield. So this was one of the things that once the flags would drop, the soldiers would then realize that, you know what, we are now in a losing position. So they would then start to retreat, and they would start to flee for their lives at that time. And as a result, even though you see in those times a lot of battles, you see that there's more killing that happens in modern warfare than it used to happen in those days. You had so many people would come face to face, but the overall killing was less than what it is now. So, for example, when 3,000 people faced 700 people, the amount of people that get killed, both sides together, are 142 people. 142 people die from both sides. So, looking at today, it would be much more devastating with the modern weaponry, and the hand-to-hand combat basically limited that. And a lot of people, when they would be in battle, once they would get injured, they would basically stay down, and the others would basically leave them alone, because the goal of the battle was to basically not necessarily kill as many people, but the goal of the battle was to basically defeat the army and then take over strategic locations and land and resources and things like that. And thus it was different. So all 11 standard bearers of Quraysh that came forward, the Muslims in the initial wave of attack managed to wipe them all out. And Abu Dujana and Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, they both fought heroically, and rumors started to spread around them in the battlefield that people said, stay away from Hamza and Abu Dujana because they are unstoppable. However, um, while this battle was taking place and Muslims were on the winning side, a slave from Mecca whose name was Wahshi bin Harb had been offered his freedom by his owner if he managed to kill Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib. Now, Wahshi had a particular specialty that he was an expert spear thrower, what you would call in our time as a sniper. That's somebody who could stay at a distance safely and still manage to kill somebody at a much farther distance from them. Um, so Wahshi bin Harb was an expert, and he was given this task that if you kill Hamza, and the person who gave him this task was a man who later on became Muslim, whose name was Jubair ibn Mut'im, whose uncle had been killed by Hamza the year before in the Battle of Badr, and he wanted to take revenge. So he told Wahshi that if you kill Hamza, then you will be free. And Wahshi basically hid behind the rock, and he managed to get his shot, and he shot his spear at Hamza radiallahu anh and killed him. Despite the loss of Hamza radiallahu anh, the Muslims were still winning, and the Meccans began to flee the battlefield. The Muslims started to chase them, and they started to collect what they were dropping of weapons and shields and whatever they had brought, which is called spoils of war. Now, when the archers who were on the mountain, when they saw this, they had been told specifically by the Prophet ﷺ not to come down even if we are losing the battle. However, now when they saw that the battle was being won, they said that now it's time for us to go and collect the spoils of war. Their leader, who was the Amir over them, told them that no, the Prophet ﷺ said you have to stay here, so we need to stay here until the Prophet tells us to come down. However, 40 out of 50 archers disobeyed the commander and disobeyed the Prophet ﷺ and came down in pursuit of the spoils of war. As soon as this happened, Khalid, who was also among the people who were now retreating, when he saw this strategic opening, he decided to come back around, and he quickly wiped out the 10 remaining archers and went around the small mountain and attacked the Muslims from behind. And once again, when things like this happen, remember that warfare in that time was a game of morale and strategy. And once you did that, and perception, once you did that, then you could basically win the war, win the battle. So when the Khalid ibn al-Walid went around, and the Quraysh that were running away stopped and they turned around, so now the Muslims are sandwiched in between. And both sides are Quraysh, and now they're coming back to fight. And the Muslims were basically sandwiched in the middle in this way. And this was a very devastating point for the Muslim morale. And while this was happening, the Prophet ﷺ saw this, and he was basically standing at a side. So you could say, like in the beginning, in the middle of the sandwich, on the side. So the Prophet ﷺ called out and he said, "O Muslims, come to me," meaning that they're both coming from here and I am back here. So if you both come back to me, then these two will unite, and now we will once again face them forward instead of being sandwiched in the middle. So the Prophet ﷺ called out in a loud voice, "O Muslims, O servants of Allah, come to me." However, nearby was a squadron of the Meccans, and they heard the voice of the Prophet ﷺ, and they came and they basically launched a very, very strong attack on the location where they thought that the Prophet ﷺ was. The Prophet ﷺ had only 9 guards that were protecting him at the time, and the Prophet ﷺ saw the squadron coming, and these were seven muhajirin, seven ansar, and two muhajirin. And one by one Ansari would go and he would basically defend the Prophet ﷺ while the others were closely guarding the Prophet ﷺ. However, one by one, each of the seven Ansaris uh, basically lost their lives in trying to defend the Prophet ﷺ. Now, the two who were left with were Talha ibn Ubaidillah and Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas. Meanwhile, a rock came at the Prophet ﷺ and hit him, and he fell on his side. His lip was cut, his teeth were broken, and his helmet basically broke off and exposing his head. And the enemy's sword, another person basically attacked him. Now they got so close that they managed to get a sword into the face of the Prophet ﷺ, and it hit the bone under his eye. And since his helmet was partly exposing his face, part of the helmet, which was chainmail, rings of it, basically went deep inside the face of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was a very devastating blow to the Prophet ﷺ. Another person attacked the Prophet with such force that it hit his shoulder with such ferocity that the Prophet ﷺ felt its pain for 1 month after this date. However, Alhamdulillah, there were no fatal or severe injuries at the time. Sa'ad radiallahu anh started to shoot arrows, trying to get these people to back up. And the Prophet ﷺ started to give him arrows from his own quiver. And he said, Irmi ya Sa'ad, shoot, O Sa'ad, fidaka abi wa ummi. And Talha radiallahu anh, he stood in front of the Prophet ﷺ and he was defending the Prophet with his hand by the arrow against the arrows that were coming and the swords that were coming. And his fingers were getting cut off. And the arrows that were coming, they were hitting his arm. That actually after this day, Talha radiallahu anh's arm was paralyzed from the amount of arrows that he took. And on this day, he took 35 or 39 injuries just by himself, Talha ibn Ubaidillah, defending the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When in one of these attacks, when they struck him and his fingers were basically getting cut, Talha radiallahu anh gasped from pain of this. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him that if you had said Bismillah, you would have been lifted by the angels before the eyes of the people. Meaning that when you feel this pain, instead of gasping or na'udhu billah, some people curse and they say, ah, ooh, and this and that. Instead, a person should try to say Bismillah or mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in some way, or subhanallah, or whatever a person says, but a remembrance of Allah will basically bring about the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first of the people to come back to the Prophet ﷺ from, in this moment when he's basically defenseless with just two people who are also heavily getting injured, Abu Bakr and Abu Ubaidah came back. Also, Jibreel and Mikael descended from the heavens to defend the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh, he lost two of his own teeth trying to pull out the rings from the face of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ was the focal point of this battle, and at this time everyone started to rush to the Prophet ﷺ, the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Also Abu Dujana and Umar and Mus'ab ibn Umair and Ali radiallahu anh, they came and they flanked the Prophet ﷺ. So now the ring of protection around the Prophet starts to get bigger, and now they start to get pushed back, the Meccans. Now Mus'ab radiallahu anh, he was the standard bearer on this day, and they said, okay, well, since we can't reach the Prophet, let's start to focus on Mus'ab. And Mus'ab radiallahu anh defended, and they first cut off the arm with which he was holding the standard. He held it with the other hand. They cut that off. He held it together, standing with the little bit left of his arms, and they basically struck him until they put him down and they killed him. Mus'ab radiallahu anh, the way he was dressed, because he was the standard bearer, he was dressed like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the man who killed him, whose name was Abdullah ibn Qam'a, assumed that this was the Prophet ﷺ who had just been killed and the standard had fallen down. So he went around the field and he said, I have killed Muhammad, I have killed Muhammad. This sent shockwaves in the field, especially for the Muslims, and panic and disorder and failing to follow the plan is what started to happen for them. Some of the Muslims they started to flee to Medina or to mountain passes, little gaps to protect themselves. Some ran towards the Prophet ﷺ. The Muslims were many and they were enough to be able to hold. However, the disorganization that happened, the chaos, it basically made all of their defenses and all of their good fighting to be not effective. Also, Yaman, the father of Huzaifa, radiallahu anhu, Huzaifa ibn Yaman, Yaman was actually killed during this time of chaos by another Muslim by mistake, friendly fire, what we call, because the first rows of the Muslims, they basically went up against the last rows because there was so much chaos, and they at one point they didn't know who they were fighting, and Yaman radiallahu anhu was killed by mistake by another Muslim. And then the false rumor that Muhammad has been killed was really devastating. Some of the companions they left the field. They said, "You know what? We're just going to walk away. There's no point in fighting anymore." Some threw down their swords and sat down on the battlefield, and some said, "Let's die for what the Prophet ﷺ died." But then Ka'b ibn Malik radiallahu anh, he recognized the Prophet ﷺ when the Prophet came back up. And he saw the eyes of the Prophet ﷺ and he recognized this is the Prophet. And he said, "O Muslims, rejoice, this is the Prophet. This is the Prophet." This galvanized the Muslims and they came to him. And very soon, 30 rows of Muslims formed around the Prophet ﷺ. At this point, the Prophet ﷺ realized that there was too much loss on the Muslim side. And he decided against further combat and retreated up a mountain pass. Basically, retreated up the mountain in a little gap where they could be protected from the army that's below, and anybody who tries to come up, they can easily shoot arrows at them and prevent them from coming up. He saved the army from further losses by doing this. And subhanAllah, all of this damage that came, it came from disobedience and disobedience of the Prophet and the love of this world. And this is a lesson for us to follow, that this is what we should not do, especially in a time of difficulty, because it will bring about losses for us. The Muslims were up high and relatively safe, and the Meccans, they then started to hunt around and to see the fallen Muslims, and they mutilated their bodies. Some of them, they cut off their noses and their ears. Some of them, they basically, with Hamza radiallahu anh, Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, she was such a bitter person at the moment, even though later on she became Muslim, that she decided to cut open the chest of Hamza radiallahu anh and to pull his liver out. And she tried to chew it, but it was so bitter that she spit it out and she walked away. The father of Jabir bin Abdullah ibn Jahsh, was also among these. A man by the name of Ubay bin Khalf from Mecca, he came to try to kill the Prophet ﷺ. He came with full force on his mount, on his horse or camel, with his spear ready, and he basically tried to come close to the Prophet ﷺ to shoot at him. But the Prophet dodged his spear, but he took a spear from the companions and he shot Ubay bin Khalf. And Ubay bin Khalf was the only person that the Prophet ﷺ is said to have killed actually. Although when the Prophet threw the spear, it basically grazed him by his face and left a cut, but he fell down from his mount and he started screaming and he said, "Muhammad has killed me, Muhammad has killed me." Because the Prophet had told him, because he kept saying to the Prophet in Mecca that, "I'm going to be the one to kill you, I'm going to be the one to kill you." So one day the Prophet said, "Rather, it is I who's going to kill you." And on this day, when he came, the Prophet ﷺ threw that spear and grazed him. Now, Ubay bin Khalf, basically, he ran away after that. And while on the way back to Mecca, his wound basically started to spread in his body, and he died from that. Abu Sufyan and Khalid ibn Walid, they tried unsuccessfully to come up the mountain, but Umar radiallahu anh and Sa'ad and some other companions, they defended the mountain pass so well that they were not able to come up and they had to make a retreat. Then they also decided that enough damage has been done and it is time to return to Mecca. Meccans lost 72 of their people on that day, and the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims lost 70 of the companions of the Prophet. And now that things are a little bit calm and there's some distance between the two armies, Ali radiallahu anh fetched some water which was in some type of puddle or something. The Prophet ﷺ tried to drink it, but it was so bitter that he could not drink it. And he instead used it to wash his face and pour over his head. But then the wound that had been basically stopped bleeding started to bleed again. So Fatima radiallahu anha, she quickly had a mat and she burned this mat and she took the ash of it and she basically put it on the wound of the Prophet ﷺ in order to basically plug it from continuing to bleed. Muhammad bin Maslama managed to bring some fresh water, and the Prophet ﷺ drank that fresh water. The Prophet ﷺ prayed Salatul Zuhr sitting, and all of his companions did the same thing, which teaches us a fiqhi ruling that if the Imam for some reason is not able to pray standing and he prays sitting, then everyone behind him should also do the same and pray sitting as well. Some of the women, they came and they basically started to bring water for the soldiers and started to nurse the wounds of the sick. Now, while this is happening, Abu Sufyan comes below the mountain and he says, "Is Muhammad among you? Afil qawmi Muhammad?" And the Prophet said, "Do not answer." Then he said, "Is Abu Bakr among you?" The Prophet said, "Do not answer." "Is Umar among you?" The Prophet said, "Do not answer." So then Abu Sufyan said that we have killed those three. We have killed all three of these. So then Umar radiallahu anh responded, "O enemy of Allah, all three of these are alive." Abu Sufyan said that your slain has been mutilated. Those people that died from you, they have been mutilated. I did not order it, but I also don't dislike it. So subhanAllah, he said that, look, I just want to tell you that I didn't order it, but it's not so bad. You guys deserve it. That's what he's saying. I neither ordered it nor disliked it. And then he said, "Glory be to Hubal, which was one of their gods." And the Prophet ﷺ told Umar to respond. And Umar said, "Allah is the highest and the most majestic." And then he said, "We have Uzza, which was also one of their gods, and you have none." So Umar radiallahu anh replied, "Allahu maulana wa la mawla lakum." Allah is our Lord, but you have no mawla, no protector. Abu Sufyan said that this is our revenge for Badr. Umar said that we are not even. Our dead are in Jannah and your dead are in hell. So you think that we are even, but we're not even, because those who died from our side are actually in Jannah. Then Abu Sufyan got close to Umar and he said, "Oh Umar, by Allah, can you tell me if Muhammad is alive? Have we killed him?" So Umar said, "No, he's alive and he can hear you right now." So then he said that I believe you more than I believe Ibn Qam'a, the one who spread the rumor that I have killed Muhammad. And he said that we shall meet again next year at Badr. He said we shall meet again. Abu Sufyan said we shall meet again next year at Badr. And Umar radiallahu anh replied, the Muslims replied that yes, it is an appointment between us. Now, a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that came down at this time is that the Meccans could have decided to go to Medina and finish off. However, they decided to go back to Mecca, although they would have had no opposition or defenses because the Muslims were in very bad state at that time. Once they left, the Prophet ﷺ came down and they started to collect the dead bodies of the martyrs, the shuhada. Some of the shuhada had been taken back to Medina, but the Prophet ﷺ ordered them to go and bring them back. And they were buried in the same place where they died. They were buried in the same place where they died. SubhanAllah, this basically teaches us the rule that the prophets of Allah are buried in the same exact place where they died. But this is what happened to the Prophet ﷺ, that his bed was removed and the grave was dug right there. The shuhada, which are very high in status and close to the prophets of Allah, are also buried in the same place where they die, but they don't have to be in the same exact spot. So in the same area where they are killed, they are buried right there. And the rest of the Muslims are to be buried in the closest cemetery where they died, closest Muslim cemetery where they died. This is a rule that we should follow, and not follow what a lot of people do, which is that they want to send their body back home wherever they came from 30 years ago or 20 years ago. The Prophet ﷺ also said that they will be buried in the same dress that they died in. And then they had to bury, there were 70 shuhada, and they were already very weak, and they were not able to dig 70 different graves. So they would dig one grave, and they would put two or three of the Sahaba among them in that grave. And among them, the one who had memorized the most amount of Quran would be buried in the front, and then the person behind him and the person behind him, less Quran and less Quran. Because subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ told us that the one who memorizes the Quran is the one who deserves to be the Imam. And the Imam is in the front. So on the day of resurrection, the Prophet ﷺ said that I will be a witness for them, and then these people will begin, and their leader will be the one who would memorize the most Quran. And when we say front, it's important to understand that there are two ways that a grave is dug in the Muslim tradition. One of them is called shak, which is basically deep down, straight down. You dig a hole and you put the body there. And the other way is to basically do an L shape, which is called the lahad, where you dig down and then you dig sideways. And then this is what was happening here. So when they would dig sideways, the first person they would put in that sideways hole, the crevice, is that they would put the one who had memorized the most Quran, and then the person behind him, and then the person behind him. And then they would basically close off that opening inside that grave. They would close off, and then they would fill up the hole with dirt. This is also the way the Prophet ﷺ was buried. And basically what that does is that it creates a small burial chamber where the dirt does not go right on top of the body, but rather there is some type of space where the body is, and then the dirt goes there. So the modern way that the same thing can be achieved is when we have a burial vault where the body is placed in a vault, or some type of barrier is placed around them, and then the dirt is put on top of them. So that way there is a space where the body is, which is not, so the body and the dirt do not become one. Although if there's a need to do so, there's no problem in that, because remember that all of these things are just a way for us to properly dispose of a body that has died, that has passed away. In essence, what happens to that body after their death is in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that if a person was buried, sometimes they say that this is, uh, it's a painful way to bury somebody, right? It's so heavy on them and things like that. These things do not matter, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet told us that when the righteous person dies, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends angels that give them the glad tidings, and they actually open up their grave for as far as the eyes can see. So even though the person was buried in a very small little hole, but in a way that we cannot see and experience, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens their grave up to be vast. And for a person who is sinful and who is a disbeliever, who is disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they could be buried in a palace. But the Prophet said that the angels bring down, when they come down, they basically constrict their grave, that they have no space. They are basically tied up in a very tight spot. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. So by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the battle basically ended in this way. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so there's a difference of opinion uh, that did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam pray janazah for them or not. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, according to one hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed janazah over them, and he did additional takbirat, so more than just four. And there are other ahadith that support this as well. And with Hamza radiallahu anh, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did 9 takbirat. Now, the Prophet ﷺ said that these bodies are not to be washed and they are to be buried in the same clothes in which they died. Now, they came across a companion whose name was Hanzala radiallahu an, and Hanzala was seeing that water was dripping from his hair. Water was dripping from his hair, and they were astonished to see that because they were not to be washed. And the Prophet ﷺ said that Hanzala had left his house in the state of janaba because he had just been married. And he left his house when the call to go out came, and he did not have time to take a ghusl of janaba. And thus, while the rest of the martyrs are to be buried in that state, Hanzala was in a state of janaba, so he has to be cleansed from that. So the angels washed him. The angels washed him, and he was known as Ghasilul Malaika, the one who was washed by the angels, the one who was washed by the angels. The Prophet ﷺ, he then made his way back to Medina, and the Prophet ﷺ basically kept, he stopped on the way to greet and to give condolences and to give some solace to those who had lost family members. When the Prophet came back, there was a woman who had lost her husband, her father, and her brother in the Battle of Uhud. And when they would tell her, she would say, "First, tell me about the Prophet ﷺ. First, tell me about the Prophet." And when they told her that the Prophet is okay, she said, "Not until I see him with my own eyes." So when she saw the Prophet ﷺ, she said that now that I see you, all grief goes away. All grief goes away. After this, there were 70 houses where basically women were widowed and they were orphans. And the Prophet ﷺ, basically, as you know, that once a husband dies, his wife is supposed to go in a state of seclusion or in a state of idda, a waiting period. Now, in this time, they came to the Prophet, they sent a message to the Prophet ﷺ, and they said, "Ya Rasulullah, losing our husbands is sad enough, but then on top of that, we have to remain in our houses and we can't go anywhere. Can you at least give us permission to go to someone else's house and and be together for some time?" So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Yes, you can go and spend uh, in one person's house. Spend the day, but you must sleep in your own house." And this is something which is explicit from the Quran and from the Sunnah. And there are people that try to find ways around it. The only exception that has been given to this is a woman who is expecting a child, and when she delivers that child, then her waiting period is over, even if it's a week after or 2 days after the husband dies. But other than that, women are supposed to practice. This is what is there in the Quran and in the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ came back to Medina, and the Muslims were on high alert because they wanted to make sure that the Meccans did not trick them. And as they basically told them, "Okay, we're going back to Mecca," and showed them that they're going back to Mecca, maybe they will turn around and come back and kill and attack Medina again. So the Prophet ﷺ basically again sent out people to carefully track the movements of the retreating enemy, and everyone remained on high alert and with the focal point of their attention to be guarding the Prophet ﷺ. Inshallah, we'll continue in our next episode about the events that took place uh, after the Battle of Uhud, which is basically that the Prophet ﷺ had to go out again the next day. Inshallah, we'll discuss that tomorrow in our next episode. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك